Hello, welcome to yet another episode of Living Free. As always, the goal is to use our stories to change narratives. And joining me today is an inspiring guest, a writer, a knife crime activist, and the Deputy Director of Communications for Pride in London. Without further ado, ladies, gentlemen, and my non-binary siblings, I'm Daniel, your host, and I'm living free with Rhammel O'Dwyer Afflick. Welcome, Rhammel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. Looking forward to a very good conversation with you. Where do we've got a lot to discuss, so let's just get right onto it.
Why not?
Cool. I was going to start with knife crime, right? So your article for The Independent, talking about the increase in stop and search would not bring an end to knife crime. So talk to me about that.
I mean, to be honest, knife crime is something I've been passionate about for a long time. I work for a charity which was founded by a young person, which was all about essentially bringing young people together to find the solutions to knife crime. Because at the time we felt that as young people, actually we were best placed to say exactly what the solutions were to knife crime. So for me, it's a long-term thing that I've always been passionate about. And the issue isn't going away, it still persists. And I'm often annoyed by how politicized the situation is. So for me, it's not really about party politics. Successive governments have failed young people. And so my point really was that, for a long time we've needed to move the conversation away from stop and search, because quite often that's all we talk about. We talk about stop and search over and over again. And for me, that's just not, it's not worthwhile, because at the end of the day, stop and search plays a role in what's happening. We know that. We know that the role it plays is overstated as well. But actually, it's not really going to help us to, root out the problem, because the issues are far more deep rooted than just what the police are doing. It's actually about how do we support young people holistically, and how do we actually talk about the trauma that some of these young people are facing, because actually it's not just about the perpetrators and the victims, it's about the families, the friends, and the impact it's having on the wider community.
And you also gave a good link to austerity as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it would be ridiculous not to kind of to show the link between the two. When we're in a situation where youth services are underfunded, we have all of these things that contribute towards young people. I guess almost being in despair and not actually feeling any affinity to their local community. Right. If your community is not giving you much, then why would you care at the end of the day? And all of these issues are linked, and I think to pretend they're not. I don't know. Yes, I just think it's not worth even acknowledging. To be honest.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about your coming out story, right? So I know you identify as bisexual.
Yes.
When and how did you come out?
So I came out when I was around about the age of 18, and I came out amongst friends. And for me, I didn't plan it. It wasn't something that I had even really thought about. But somebody asked me while I was at a party, actually. But that was literally what happened. Someone asked me at a party, and they said to me, so Rhammel, like, are you gay, or I don't, and I just said, no, I'm bi. And before I knew it, that spread like nobody's business, and before you know it, everyone knew. And it was quite interesting, because I hadn't even told my closest friends or anything like that. But for me, I had reached a point where I knew who I was, and I was kind of like, why am I hiding this, really? Like I didn't always understand who I was, because for me, I hadn't hadn't even considered it. I'd only ever been in opposite sex relationships. And then I just started to realize that I'm not gonna hide this. And at the time, I was really quite a vocal person and outspoken. and I didn't see why I shouldn't be outspoken about those things too. So I decided to come out amongst friends, and then I came out rather publicly via a blog that I did for the Huffington Post.
Right.
And the same year also was part of like a billboard campaign. So I kind of went from one extreme to the other. But
how
for me,
how did your family find out?
My family, I had a conversation directly with my parents, and I think it's interesting because I don't know why, I didn't really fear the conversation. It was almost a bit of a joke the way it kind of happened anyway as well. It wasn't like the most serious conversation. Right. But I kind of had, my gut instinct was that I wasn't going to have a problem with that. And so I know that's, I'm speaking from a privileged point of view. I know that's not the story for a lot of people. A lot of people aren't in that position where their family is supportive.
But it's also good to hear stories like this as well.
Yeah, but I think it is, because actually, there are also a lot of people who imagine that their parents are going to have a negative response, when actually, some parents, they might not, in that initial phase, be as supportive as they should have been, but quite a lot of parents do come around, and I think you're right. It is important that it isn't always that negative experience. But yeah, for me, my mum was very supportive, and she still is supportive.
Oh, that's good.
She came down to UK Black Pride this year.
Wow.
And it was great to see her. But that for me has always been part of that. So
amazing.
Yeah, I didn't have that story that many people have.
It's good, and I think that is sort of kind of a goal for many of us as well. Have that. God, could you imagine that mother and son relationship? And then being yourself as well.
Yeah,
beautiful.
It's important.
Really. Oh God. I mean, it's your mom. What else? Talk to me about, because I know there's been some, what I say, confusion around bisexuality and pansexuality.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something you wanted to unpack for us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think I think there's been a lot more discussion this year about what bisexuality means, both in the mainstream media and in the LGBT media, and I think it's interesting, but I find that actually quite often bisexual people are asked the same questions, or they face the same tropes, etc. And all it is attraction to more than one gender at the end of the day, and that's it in its most basic term. But for some reason, people just can't quite cope with that. And I think one of the things I did find quite interesting when I did come out amongst the LGBT community, and I started going out clubbing, and I started meeting more LGBT people who are openly LGBT. I was conscious of my race, but I was also conscious of my sexuality, specifically because I just imagined that, I was going to always imagine that I would have problems with straight people who, who just didn't get it, right? But I never imagined that I would meet other gay men in particular who they just didn't get it, or they were derogative in some way. And so for me, one of the things that's quite sad is even since then, we still got a massive way to go before actually people acknowledge and respect that actually sexuality is a little bit more fluid than these very very binary ways of thinking. But the least I didn't expect it. I really didn't, and perhaps I was naive at the time, but I didn't expect it. Now I come to expect it, and being bi in itself has its own. We face our own issues, both in that sometimes our sexuality can be invisible, but also sometimes we're subjected to things that I think others within the community might not be. So for example, I've been I can remember working in one workplace where unfortunately someone decided to go on a homophobic rant because he knew about my ex-girlfriend, but I didn't actually realize I was openly bi, and things like that I think sometimes I think about, and I think unfortunately people have this very specific worldview, and quite often, because the mainstream LGBT narrative is focused on white cisgendered gay men, quite often anything else is hard to comprehend. It shouldn't be, but it is. Anything that's
as a sad reality. So I mean, you kind of touched on it, but the intersectionality, right? So being bi, being black.
I I mean, for me, I wrote an article about this actually a few years ago, and I think for me, I think when I entered the LGBT community in terms of actually actively participating in things, so whether that was working for Pride in London or whatever the case may be, I think that was when I started to become more conscious of those things, because I think it became harder for me to separate out my identity. What did it mean to be a black man? What did it mean to be bisexual? It's actually how do all of these things fit together and build the experience that I had. And particularly because I started to meet more and more black gay men who had similar experiences, and other bi people who are having similar experiences. And that's when you start to realize my experience can't be separated out. Actually, my experience is the way it is because of the way that all of these identities sometimes clash, but also interconnect.
So what would you say has been the most challenging moment then?
My most challenging moment...
Because you don't wake up one day to say, I'm going to fight biphobia today, I'm going to fight racism.
Yeah, I mean, my most challenging moment for me is when I'm working in a professional setting, because I have, I think over a period of time, become more and more unapologetic about, in both inclusivity and diversity. And I think that has meant that, some people have had to hear some hard truths. And some of those people are people I would consider, friends or colleagues. And I think that sometimes is the most challenging thing, because actually, whilst being shouted, homophobic abuse in the street, or all of the things that that are seem far worse, some of those things are awful. But actually, I think sometimes the most challenging thing isn't working with people who you're absolutely against, but is actually working with people who consider themselves to be quite open-minded, but actually they're quite they're liberal, and they think that they're above that. And it's like, actually no, some of your behavior actually enables or perpetuates some of the people that you would consider problematic. And sometimes I think I found that more frustrating than somebody who's shouting at me in the street, because I know where I stand there. You know what I mean? And
I expect those who love you to get it.
Absolutely. And so if you really get it and you really understand, then why are we in this position now? It's kind of how I feel about that. And so I think that's been most challenging for me and most frustrating.
If it comes from someone you love, it does hurt the most in a way. Let's talk about mental health. Right? So something we address on the show. What has it been like as a black? So would you consider yourself quickly black bisexual man or bisexual black man?
Black bisexual man. I saw this conversation as well, and I definitely insightful. In the sense that, because I think, first of all, I mean, I kind of alluded to it earlier around bisexuality being quite invisible anyway, so in some respects. So people either assume you're straight or they assume you're gay. So I'm never really considered bisexual first by people who observe me. So in my mind, I don't view it that way. When it comes to blackness, I think that the reality is that there's no escaping the way that people treat you as a black person within Britain, and I think that being the context is quite important. If I lived somewhere else in the world, maybe that would be different. But for me, living in Britain, I know that at the end of the day, that's what I'm defined by first. And so I'm always very conscious of that, regardless of the space I'm in. But I'm also very aware of the way that people react to you. And quite often, and I think again naively, when I first came into the LGBT community, my viewpoint was that the issues that LGBT people had faced would be enough for people to kind of get racism. I really was naive. Like, I just
empathize.
They empathize at the very least, and I got a shock, and I quickly learned that actually that's just not how it works at all.
Yeah.
And I think that we could go on and on about that topic, but I think I definitely would say that I'm black but first before I'm anything else, to be honest.
It's that's what they see when they see us. Quoting Phil Samba. So mental health. So what's it been like? Have you looked after your mental health?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So obviously, I've been part of Pride in London for a long time, and I've been openly sort of campaigning and done TV commentary for a long time as well. And I think that quite often it's very easy to kind of dismiss the stress that comes along with being someone who has decided to be quite public about the way that they feel and their actions, whether that's through writing, etc. And I think that one of the things I've spoken to some other people who probably wouldn't call themselves activists, but in my mind are definitely activists, is that I think we have to be more honest about the fact that actually, activism isn't glamorous. I think people think, because you might get invited to a few glossy events every now and then, that actually, that's why people are involved in activism, because it's sexy in some way, and they don't see the other side to it. So, the fact that I might be up until 2 a.m. in the morning filling out a spreadsheet because I believe Pride in London is important, and I believe that whilst we can go on for ages about the things that mean it isn't the perfect event, actually it still plays an important role in sending a political message, not just for Londoners or even just for the UK, but actually globally. And I think that quite often people forget that actually it's not all glamorous. Actually, most of it is hard work and blood, sweat, and anger and frustration and happiness. There's so many emotions, but I think quite often people also talk about self-care now. This is the thing that everyone, it's like a buzzword at the moment, isn't it? Everyone loves a bit of self-care, but actually it's quite hard to actually practice self-care, because for me, I one of the things that I've always concentrated on throughout all of the stuff that I've ever done is that it's not really about me. Whilst I'm guided by my own lived experiences, actually for me, it's about that wider narrative. And and in that way, I want to be selfless about things. So for me, I'll work a 7-day week if it means that things get done, because I'm passionate enough to do that. And sometimes I do get asked that question: how do you have enough time to do all of these things? But the answer is pure passion. And if you're passionate enough about moving, exactly. If you're passionate enough about changing something, you'll put all you can into it. Having said that, I do think it is important to have that balance. I can admit I'm definitely not always good at finding that balance. But I think it's important.
Would you consider yourself a workaholic then?
Sometimes. But having said that, I also know how to have a good time as well. I'm still in. And that's the thing. I mean, I will. Whilst I'm working hard, I'm still playing hard too. And I think that, but it's important. And I think actually, self-care. No, but it is part of the self-care. For me, you just need to be able to relax and enjoy yourself. And absolutely. And this is why I think I'm so passionate about defending the idea of safe spaces, because sometimes actually I don't think people realise that sometimes just living in the UK, just existing, can be tiresome. And so to be able to go into a space where you can just relax, and you don't have to put up a front, you don't have to bite your tongue, you don't have to, or not bite your tongue, go the whole other way and pull some up, and sometimes it's good to have
therapeutic.
But then it's also therapy, and it's therapeutic, but it's also that opportunity to have a laugh about some of the things that are problematic. I don't think there's anything nicer than sitting down, particularly with other black LGBT people, and just to sit down and laugh about the things that you just can't even comprehend being. But you connect on that moment, and I think that for me is very powerful.
I think it's like a coping mechanism. I don't know.
It is.
It's not really funny, but
Exactly. If you actually start to analyze some of the things that we're laughing about, critically, it isn't particularly funny. But somehow you use that humor to actually get through things, and I think it's a huge part of healing, because a lot of people don't realize that these experiences, they are very traumatic, and I think it's not a coincidence that the LGBT people in the UK have poorer mental health than the wider population, because actually these issues do take their toll on people, and it's serious business, and at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons I'm just so passionate about safe spaces, and I won't take anyone making stuff up about what it actually means, because it's just important.
The misconception, people think, fighting for safe space means you're being divisive, or you're being racist,
it's reverse racism, it's exclusive, and it's like, it's healing. Actually it's healing, but also be thankful, and that's why sometimes I get be thankful you don't need that space, but also sometimes this is why I get annoyed, because sometimes I'm like, actually, why are you trying your hardest to be a victim in this? You're not actually the reason why people quite often feel affronted by safe spaces is because for once in their life they're not invited to, or they're not really openly invited to be a part of something where they're used to being able to not only occupy spaces but also to occupy them confidently, and importantly to speak in spaces where they might not even have any expertise on the matter, but because of who they are and their position and their privilege, they're afforded that anyway. And so it's like, give people the opportunity in the space to also experience that for this one moment out of the whole of their week.
I think it is the lack of recognition when it comes to privilege. Same with like straight pride and
absolutely
stuff.
Absolutely.
When there are countries in the world where
absolutely it is, and actually one of the things that I think is interesting is quite often people get annoyed by the kind of the co-opting of terms. So things like privilege and intersectionality, suddenly people are using it a little bit, are using it a lot more, and part of me gets frustrated by that, because sometimes it's like, actually just because something is mainstream doesn't mean people have actually understood the theory behind some of the terms that are being used, but actually part of it is actually we have to recognize that it has to be challenged, but challenged in the right way, because at the end of the day, for me, there's just a lot of people that they don't acknowledge their privilege, but they just don't even understand it as a concept, in their mind, because they've had some kind of struggle in their life. One day someone didn't serve them in the shop, so they've had that struggle, and it's like,
that is such an important point to raise, that the understanding of privilege as a concept, and who benefits and stuff.
But absolutely, but then and quite often people think they specifically think it's about struggle, but also they think it's about other people, so they don't acknowledge it's about their own behavior. So they think that actually when they think about being anti-racist, that it's about me pointing fingers about someone else. It's like, actually, what are you doing as well? Look inwards, because actually there's something that you can acknowledge, something you can do differently, that might be about influencing other people, but also could be about influencing your own behaviour. And until people get that, we'll stay in this space.
I saw something on Facebook the other day about white privilege, some fantastic definition. Doesn't mean you've not been through struggles in your life. It just means your skin colour has never been
a reason. Exactly. It's as basic as that.
Wow.
But this is it. This is basic as that. And I think sometimes people are being deliberately obtuse. I'm sorry. I don't believe for 1 second you don't get that. You don't get what's happening here. But at the same time, part of it is also there is education. But one of the things that I am also passionate about is that actually we shouldn't be relying on people of color or black people to educate people on some of these
emotional
issues.
labor.
Absolutely. And if you do want education, pay for it. But for me,
and there's Google as well.
Well, absolutely. You know, I that used to be my favorite response. I feel like I've overused it now, but it is true, and that's for me why I find it quite difficult, because it's like, actually this information is public information, it's publicly available, so at this point I can't give you the benefit of the doubt, and at the end of the day, at the end of the day, you can point to other people, but if you're not acknowledging yourself, I don't know, I just don't have.
Word.
I'm not sure if I have time for it.
Word. Right, let's get on to the last part.
Mm-hmm.
I feel we should go on and on. But yeah, what advice would you give to someone who is watching across the world and is struggling? You know, especially coming from a social group within the LGBT, LG, within the community that is very marginalized. So what would you say to them?
I think my message to anyone thinking about any of these issues or coming out, etc., I think for me is to reflect on your own well-being and mental health first. What's going to be positive for you, and what's going to be safe for you as well, because it's okay saying that. It's easy to say that coming out has a positive effect on your mental health and well-being, but if it means that there are other things that are integral to, well, at the end of the day, your survival, then I think it's important to acknowledge those things, and I don't think it should be taken lightly. I think quite often you see these videos about coming out that are very, again, they don't even acknowledge their own privilege. They might be in a position where they're not going to be made homeless, they're not going to, all of these other issues aren't even in the question. And so for me, it's about acknowledging your own circumstance, because I think, whilst I, for example, had that really positive experience, not everyone will, and not everyone has.
Yeah, true. Oof, I've come to the end of the interview.
Hey.
Well, yeah, that's it. We've said some really, really, really key stuff here. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, you're a friend of the show, and keep doing what you do. We admire your effort and hard work. Thank you for watching. So follow Rhammel on Instagram and Twitter. And do not forget to subscribe on the channel. Till I see you next time, keep living free, keep feeling free. Bye.